All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're demystifying the systemic safety nets of medical toxicology. You know, we interact with thousands of chemicals, medications, and environmental agents every single day. And most of the time, we are perfectly safe. But when things go wrong, how exactly does the medical system step in to protect us from these invisible threats? Well, let's find out.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're talking about here, let's look at this staggering number. In a single recent year, there were 2.1 million toxication cases logged by the U.S. National Poison Data System. 2.1 million. That's a massive volume. And alongside that, there were over 100,000 fatal overdoses in just a 12-month period. So, toxicology isn't just some niche medical field. It is a massive, ongoing public health challenge that requires a highly coordinated, systemic response.
As this quote brilliantly points out, poisons have literally shaped human history for millennia. But while our minds might immediately jump to ancient political assassinations or, shadowy spies, today our biggest threats look totally different. The modern toxicological landscape is actually dominated by everyday medication errors, complex pharmaceutical adverse events, and agricultural toxins.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll hit poisoning by the numbers, look at the global toxicology landscape, talk about adverse events and errors, explore the Poison Center Lifeline, and finally, wrap up with patient safety and research.
Okay, jumping right into our first stop, poisoning by the numbers.
Get this, a massive 90% of those 100,000-plus recent deaths we just mentioned, they were completely unintentional. While intentional ingestions or illicit drug overdoses are usually what grab the headlines, the vast majority of fatal poisonings are totally accidental. And what that means is that public education, proper storage, and systemic safety measures are absolutely vital, because these are, by definition, preventable tragedies. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the global toxicology landscape.
When you look at the worldwide data, the sheer volume of agricultural poisonings in low- and middle-income countries is just wild. We're talking about roughly 3 million pesticide poisonings globally every year. But let's look specifically at metal phosphides, things like aluminum phosphide and zinc phosphide. These are used as cheap fumigants to protect grain, right? But they are insanely toxic to humans. Aluminum phosphide has a case fatality rate as high as 67%, and there is currently no specific antidote for it. This is a massive driver of toxicological emergencies in regions like Pakistan, India, Nepal, Thailand, and Tanzania.
Bringing it back closer to home, let's jump to Section 3, Adverse Events and Errors. When we hear toxin, we usually picture glowing green vials or harsh chemicals under the sink. But an adverse drug event, or ADE, it's often just a regular prescribed medication sitting right there in your bathroom cabinet. An ADE can happen from a prescribing error, maybe a mix-up in pills, or, and this is crazy, even just an unforeseen bodily reaction to a drug that you took exactly as directed. And there's actually a fascinating and stark demographic divide in how these errors play out. For the little ones, poison centers receive over 115,000 calls a year just for therapeutic errors, often because kids are just exploring their environment and get into medications. But thankfully, their mortality rate is super low. On the flip side, geriatric patients, especially folks 85 and older, face life-threatening risks. They're often dealing with polypharmacy, which is just the medical term for taking multiple medications at once. Plus, they frequently hold on to outdated drugs in their homes, making their adverse drug events much more likely to be serious or even fatal.
So what happens when an exposure actually does occur? How did doctors figure out what to do? Well, toxicologists rely on a superstructured clinical approach. They zero in on the patient's vital signs: eyes, temperature, lungs, heart rate, skin. The core philosophy here in medical toxicology is you treat the patient, not just the poison. By tracking these vital signs, clinicians can spot specific toxidromes, which are toxic syndromes, and they can start life-saving stabilization before they even know exactly what pill was swallowed.
Which brings us to our fourth section, the Poison Center Lifeline.
Seriously, I want you to ask yourself a very practical question right now. If a therapeutic error happens in your home today, let's say a child swallows a handful of adult medication, what is your immediate next step? Who do you call?
Well, in the U.S., the answer is this incredible universal lifeline, 1-800-222-1222. Calling that number connects you directly to one of 55 regional centers. And you aren't just getting a random operator reading from a script. These centers are supported by board-certified medical and clinical toxicologists with specialized training in poisoning resuscitation. They provide expert treatment guidance instantly. It's basically the ultimate safety net for both the general public and for emergency room doctors.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, Patient Safety and Research.
You might think the safety checks end once a drug gets approved, right? Actually, scratch that. The work is just beginning. Through a process called post-marketing surveillance, epidemiologists continuously track adverse effects long after a drug hits the wider market. Using tracking systems like FDA MedWatch, they are constantly gathering data on how drugs affect diverse populations in the real world. If a drug proves too dangerous, or maybe it needs dosage adjustments for the elderly, this continuous surveillance loop ensures the medical community adapts, updating prescribing laws to make sure patient safety is always priority number one.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to chew on. Systemic risk management, from global epidemiology down to your local poison control center, works tirelessly behind the scenes to protect you every single day. But ultimately, that massive safety net relies heavily on your own awareness. From properly storing your medications to just having the poison control number saved in your phone, what steps can you take today to keep your household safe from the invisible threats of adverse events?